Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing us to present at this conference. Today, we're going to be discussing a study that we've been working on. The results of the study make a significant contribution to literature of student athlete college choice. The study is titled "The Difference in College Choice Factors Between Parents and Student Athletes and the Effects of Personal Fit on School Selection." My name is Billy Nixon. I am currently the Director of Equipment and Player Experience at Brigham Young University. I've been working with the football team here now for 5 years. And my colleague is Zach Mayo, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zachary Mayo. I'm an assistant professor of business at St. Mary's University in Winona, Minnesota. And I'm happy to be a co-presenter here with Dr. Billy Nixon.
So we'll kind of run through a little bit of a brief introduction, talk about the statement of purpose, our research questions, review the methods used, go through the findings, and then talk about discussion of each one of those findings, and then make recommendations. This study focuses a lot on a practitioner standpoint and does address a lot of the issues specific to Brigham Young University and recruiting, and I'll explain a little bit about that as we introduce the study. So here at BYU, we have our stadium is named after our Hall of Fame football coach, Coach LaVell Edwards. And Coach LaVell Edwards basically built BYU football. He spent the majority of his career here. He was the first winning coach in BYU history. He actually led the team to a national championship in 1984. And BYU is the last and only group of 5 level program to win a national championship. Now, LaVell Edwards in 1978, he was pursuing his doctorate in educational leadership from BYU. And while he was doing that, he wrote his dissertation on identifying recruiting factors. And he did that from the perspective of coaches. So he sent out surveys to coaches throughout the country to basically gather what student athletes were looking for during their recruiting visits. And from that, he published several pieces, but he made recommendations for future research. The recommendations he made were to look at college choice factors and extract those from the perspective of student athletes. And that's been done, right? And so we've seen since LaVell Edwards over the last 30 years, we've seen a lot of research come out surveying student athletes at different various levels of play and extracting college choice factors and finding out what influences their college decision. A lot of these investigations, scholars have explored factors from the perspective of student athletes, segmented based off of division affiliation, sport, gender, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status, financial need, and relative to the traditional student. And so even though a lot's been done, there's still gaps in this literature. And as LaVell Edwards discussed, back even in 1978, the climate of college football was there's an arm race growing back then. And he recognized that a school like BYU with specific needs would have to identify factors to be able to target during the recruiting process so they can get the most bang for their buck during the recruiting season. And BYU is a very challenging school to recruit to, even today, even more so, not because of budget constraints, but also the Brigham Young University. Brigham Young University is affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and so there's honor code put in place that football players have to abide by, and that also throws a little wrinkle into the recruiting process. And so again, identifying these factors helps our coaches understand, hey, how do we target our messaging to influence these athletes and help them realize they fit the BYU atmosphere and community. And so the areas that are the biggest gap right now in student athlete college choice literature are parent perception. To date, there has not been a study in college choice that's been published that compares student athlete perception to parent perception. Religious affiliation, there's been a little bit of research, but not much. Revenue versus non-revenue, right? That's another underdeveloped area to explore, and then also scholarship status. So, Zach, you want to go ahead and share a statement of purpose?
Yeah. So thinking about why we are we were developing this study from the beginning was because we wanted to be able to identify and create somewhat of a game plan or a cookbook per se as to how to more effectively recruit and develop the literature around more effective recruiting. So therefore that led us to develop the purpose of this study, which is really to measure the influence of college choice factors for student athletes, but also mostly for parents. And then determine if those factors significantly differ between the student athletes and the student athletes' parents. Then secondly, we wanted to also compare results and compare the results between the different segmented populations based upon gender, sport, scholarship status, and also religious affiliation. Billy, if you could go to the next slide.
Yeah, we also understand there's some limitations of this study because the majority of the study was done at BYU. And we recognize that. And before we even go into our research questions, we'll explain that, to Zach's point, we want to provide a cookbook, right? So this can be done at replicated at other institutions. This study, because we're looking at the perceptions of both parents and student athletes, is challenging. Even with my affiliation with BYU, I found it really challenging to work with coaches and to extract this data. So for us to find more information, this study, we hope, will be replicated at other institutions.
So we went into this study with a few research questions in mind. And namely those research questions were, does the influence of college factors differ between obviously the student athlete and the student athlete's parents? And then also the segmented populations, are there differences between the student athletes and their parents based upon gender, based upon sport, scholarship status, and religious affiliation? Like Billy had mentioned, this type of data is difficult to extract and also difficult to find the appropriate participants because we're comparing the student athletes themselves to the parents of the student athletes, and the parental information is really the information that is quite difficult to find. And so hence, like Billy had mentioned before, we stayed just with BYU in that we were able to find a university that was willing to take a deeper dive into how to develop a more effective recruiting strategy, not just for the players, but for the parents of the players, because we know that those are individuals that influence the players' end-all be-all school selection.
So the methods that we use for this is, after receiving IRB approval, we used a survey that we sent out to student athletes at Brigham Young University. The majority of sport teams at BYU participated in this, and then the survey was emailed to the parents of the participants. And then the survey for student athletes was distributed through a messaging service that we use called Pronto. And we used Qualtrics to make it as easy as possible for both parents and players, regardless of where they were, to participate in the survey. And so we used a questionnaire that both Professor Mayo and I used in a previous study of intercollegiate student athlete college choice. We made slight modifications to the questionnaire. One was specific to student athlete, and survey B was specific to parents. And then we sent it out, and it took less than 5 minutes to complete. And so it was pretty short and quick survey. It had 38 items, and it measured 6 factors of college choice. And so we looked at the difference between those factors and then items associated with those factors. Our response was pretty good. We had 149 male student athletes, 106 fathers of student athletes. We had 98 females, and then 100 mothers of student athletes. And so it was a pretty good representation. With demographic wise, our ethnicity, right, was heavily Caucasian, and pretty sizable amount of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders. And again, that's a pretty good representation of the demographics at BYU. Academic standing, we again had a really good distribution of freshmen, sophomore, junior, and senior, both student athletes and their parents. Revenue, we had more non-revenue athletes because the only revenue sport that participated in this study, or the only 2 revenue sports, were basketball and football, and there's only a total of 138 that survey was sent to. So it received 92. Response rate was really, really good. Again, we had a pretty good representation of scholarship versus partial and no scholarship. The religious affiliation, 86% of the respondents were members of the predominant religion, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and which is really good because, in fact, 85% of the student athletes at BYU are members of the church. So for the most part, the responses really reflect our population well here at BYU. But again, this has to be replicated at another institution so we can draw different comparisons. But what we're looking at is how, with recruiting, is, how do we sell to that student athlete that they fit that institution? So the demographics of BYU are important to know, right? We're obviously going to get more members of the church, right? We are a church-based institution. And so that's why this study is so important, because hopefully other institutions do this so they can identify, and meet the specific needs of the athletes that are more likely to attend their institution. So we ran a Chromebox Alpha, and we found to have an internal consistency of 0.93, which is great. And then the mean rankings of the 6 factors were academics overall had the greatest influence on school selection, followed by coaching, athletics, location, significant persons, and communication tactics. Standard deviations ranged from 0.77 for athletics to 0.96 for coaching. So research question 1, does the influence of college choice factors differ between student athletes and their parents? Based off of results of Manova, we found that 1 of the 6 factors differed, and that was communication tactics, but the rest were the same. The significant finding of this study is the fact that there was not that much difference at all, that most of the parent perception and student athlete perception aligned. So academics had the most significant influence on college choice from both student athletes and parents. Both ranked after academics, coaching, athletics, location, significant persons, and communication tactics basically in the same order. Among academics, the academic value of the university had the greatest influence on both student athletes and parents. Academic reputation of the university also ranked second among both athletes and parents. Future career opportunities, ranked third among both student athletes and parents. So the top three items associated with the academic factor, right, were ranked the same. And future career opportunities is a huge one. Huffman and Cooper in their study of SEC football players found that had the greatest influence on the decision making of those individuals. And so it shows that student athletes at any level are really interested in going somewhere that's gonna set them up for success after they're done playing, their sport. So coaching, both parents and student athletes felt that the coach's ability to develop players, coaching philosophy and style of play, and the head coach's personality ranked the top three among the coaching factor. With athletics, both student athletes and parents found tradition of athletic programs to have the most significant influence, followed by athletic facilities, strength of schedule. Location, community surrounding the campus, proximity to family, regional location of the university, and the distance from the hometown to the university. And again, parents and student athletes saw eye to eye on the influence of location items. The only difference was between student athletes and their parents was communication tactics, which had a greater influence on parents. And so among those, unofficial campus recruiting visits, telephone calls from coaches, official campus recruiting visits had a great influence on parents' perception on that school fit. And so, again, these are all important because these are items that we found student athletes and parents work together and explore as they're going through the recruiting process. So research question 2, when student athletes and parents, what's the difference, or do they differ when segmented based on gender? And we found that there was no significant difference when we segmented based off of male and female responses. And so the current study found no significant difference between student athletes' responses when segmented based on gender. This is consistent with previous research by Andrew et al. 2016, and they found the same thing. They also found that there was a slight difference. It wasn't significant, but a slight difference in academics. And females slightly valued academics as having a greater impact, but again, it wasn't significant. And just like Andrew's study, we also found the same in ours. The significant finding of this study is that both male and female parents share a more similar view of academics with their female athletes. So it wasn't surprising, but again, it shows how closely aligned parents and student athletes are in their perception of how these factors influence school selection.
Talking a little bit about research question number 3, which is, does the influence of college choice factors differ for student athletes and parents when segmented based on revenue versus non-revenue sports? So similar to the other research questions, we did a MANOVA, and we were able to find that there was a significant difference in between subjects based upon, or for communication tactics and also significant persons, whereas the other factors were not. So the main takeaway on this slide for everyone to remember or to understand is that when comparing the players versus the parents and what their perception levels were, parents actually identified the assistant coaches as being more influential in the recruitment process. And players actually identified head coaches as being more influential throughout the recruitment process. So this is where there is a difference between the player perception and the parents' perception. And so the difference here might actually lead to certain tactics throughout the recruiting strategy of a given team on how to recruit players a little bit differently than parents. And again, as Billy mentioned before, previously throughout the presentation, this study, again, should be replicated at other institutions as well, so that they can see if there's a difference between that player versus parent perception. Can you go to the next slide, Billy? The next question, research question number 4, was the influence of college choice factors. Does it differ for student athletes and parents when segmented based upon scholarship status? Again, we ran a MANOVA to indicate how the factors differ. And there was a significance found for the coaching, athletics, communication, tactics, and significant persons factors. Billy, can you go to the next slide so I could explain that a little bit more? So this one, again, shows some interesting results. So full scholarship athletes and their parents were more greatly influenced by these factors when compared to non-scholarship players and parents. And I don't think that that's, or I think that that's easily understandable because I would assume that many coaches and recruiting professionals are spending a significant greater amount of time focused on those full scholarship athletes compared to the quote unquote walk-ons at different onto different teams. And so I could see how those specific factors and those variables within those factors would differ between full versus non-scholarship athletes. Billy, you could go to the next slide.
And so the last research question that we looked at was how religious affiliation affected student athlete and parent school selection. Now, again, BYU being a religious institution, a lot of the student athletes that come here, it's because of their religious affiliation. And so we knew that there'd be a huge difference between student athletes when segmented based off of whether they're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or not. But this was very important for our coaches because at BYU, the coaches are constantly concerned with what are athletes that are not affiliated with the church, what are they looking for? Because they already know that the church among member athletes gives us a great advantage. So when we looked and compared the two, we saw that academics, coaching, athletics, and communication items had the greatest influence on non-member athletes, which does not come as a surprise, right? We kind of expected that these variables, these factors would have a greater influence on non-member athletes, right? Because they don't already have a connection to the institution. But what was cool is taking a deeper look into what are the items that influence these non-member athletes. The number one thing was academics, right? BYU has great academics, and the university's academic value, it's great bang for your buck. So tuition is actually fairly low for a private institution. And also academic support services. Athletes, whether they're member or not member, they want to know they can have the help they need in the classroom. Coaching had a great influence on non-member school selection. Specifically, the head coach's ability to develop players, followed by coaching philosophy and style of play, and the head coach's personality. Third, athletics. Right, athletic facilities played a huge role in non-member school selection, followed by strength of schedule and equipment and apparel. Communication tactics, right, included text messages, official campus recruiting visits, and telephone calls from coaches. Again, communication tactics had a much greater influence on non-members, and BYU is well known among members of the church, regardless of whether they're an athlete or not. And so, a lot of these non-members, they don't know much about BYU at all until they're recruited with using communication tactics anyway. And so that's why it comes as no surprise that communication had a greater influence on non-members. And the only thing that was interesting was that location had a much greater influence on members, parents and players that are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the two items specifically, the campus community and the proximity to family and relatives. This doesn't surprise me that the campus community, I think that we both felt that this was, a reflection of just that religious atmosphere that a lot of members are looking for. And that does not have as big of an appeal. The campus community doesn't have as big of appeal to athletes that don't share the predominant faith.
So thinking about future recommendations that come out of this study, right? First, we strongly believe that teams and athletic departments need to really implement recruiting tactics that are going to be most effective, not only on the student athlete perception, but ones that are going to shape the parents' perception. Then that leads to, we strongly believe that we need to strengthen that parent-coach relationship, right? And that could be done via greater increases in contact with the parents. That could be phone calls, text messages, home visits, some other recruiting tactic that could be beneficial. Also, we feel as though that institutions need to highlight the educational value in a more effective or efficient manner, and highlight the academic support services that athletes have access to, and then also all of the resources that contribute to recruiting an athlete or to the recruits' athletic development. So we're really talking about the development of a student athlete here, which then leads me as well to recruiting student athletes that are predominantly members of the faith, specifically talking about BYU here. More effort should be put on that behalf to highlight the community's elements that support the spiritual development of those student athletes. Again, that could be very applicable to other institutions that are of a faith-based organization. So again, highlighting the spiritual development of an athlete could be beneficial for those types of institutions as well. And then lastly, specifically for BYU and also other strongly faith-based institutions, recruiting non-members of that faith, those institutions might need to focus more highly on highlighting the academic and coaching or athletic characteristics of the institution as well. So these recommendations moving forward are not only applicable to BYU, but there are various faith-based institutions around the country that could implement these types of recommendations, and they might be able to see and yield beneficial results from it.
Yeah, and I think that this study shows the need for institutions to identify factors that influence the school selection of their athletes that chose that institution, because these athletes and their parents are looking for fit. And like Dr. Mayo brought up, we have a lot of, BYU's unique, right? And because I work here, I understand how BYU's unique. But most institutions can also say that they're unique in their own ways, right? That they have challenges. Every institution has different budgets. They have different resources, different locations, different demographics that they, of students. So every institution could benefit from exploring how the factors shape the perception of the students that choose to attend that institution. So we challenge others to follow kind of the pattern of this study and explore it at their institution. And again, to reiterate what we said at the beginning, this study had a very strong focus on practitioner application. And so these findings can help practitioners develop strategies that are going to be more beneficial, specific to the needs of their institution. So for future research, we definitely think a larger sample of student athletes and parents would help further identify college choice factors and how those differ between institutions and conferences. I think that it's beneficial to investigate student athletes and parents and segment it based on demographic information such as ethnicity and household income. It would be beneficial to explore the influence of communication tactics further, such as elements of campus recruiting visits, frequency of interpersonal communication, and explore how to strengthen the coach recruit and coach parent relationship more specifically. And the last thing is to investigate other items not directly associated with the 6 factors of college choice, such as financial, personal, and family relationship and dynamics. And lucky for us, I know that Professor Mayo, he's actually doing research right now on how family dynamics and relationships influence student athletes. So we're looking forward to building upon this research agenda. Again, thank you so much for your time. We invite any of those that are interested to learn more about our study or have any questions, please reach out. My email is bnixon@byu.edu. And Zach, well,
Yeah, I'm happy to answer. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any other questions as well. And my email is Z as in Zachary Mayo, Mayo, which is just the first letter of my first name and my last name. Z Mayo at SMUMN, stands for St. Mary's University of Minnesota, smumn.edu. Thank you so much for all of your attention, and thank you so much for reviewing our presentation. Again, we're happy to further discuss any of our findings with anyone that reaches out to us. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.